You're tuned into the Wade Borth Podcast, the place where clarity replaces confusion and real conversations open new doors for your financial life. Let's dive in and rethink what's possible. Welcome back to the Wade Borth Podcast. This is going to be part 2 of the conversation with Todd Langford. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. Sit back and relax and just take what he has to say as a person that's been in the industry for a long time and can bring a lot of insight into really what's going on in the industry and within our lives. So sit back and relax. Enjoy.
You know, it's fascinating to hear you, Todd, say, oh, this year I just learned X, Y, Z. It's humbling, right? Like with the thousands of people that you've trained and I can imagine the hours you've spent thinking about this and preparing tools to impact not just agents, but the industry broadly. It's fascinating to hear that you still have a learner's mentality, and it sets, I think, a good standard for everyone in the industry to continue to advance our conversation with a humble attitude that we still have lots to learn. And it brings a question to my head, if you don't mind me asking you this. If you think about all that you've developed over the years, and you were to reduce, and I know it's a tough question, but if you were to reduce this to like 2 or 3 fundamental ideas that you've constantly year after year continue to put out there for people to be influenced by, maybe it's calculators, maybe it's just ideas in the narrative you teach. What do you think are the things that jump to your head as like, these would be the fundamental things every agent around the country, every client should hear for us to think about this accurately?
Wow. Okay. So if I boiled it down to some small things, and I know, we're very whole life insurance friendly when it's in the right strategy, right? When it's part of a strategy, and that is that there's this idea that life insurance has a terrible rate of return. And what happens is everybody's comparing the net after fees, expenses, everything return to the gross in something else that's actually an investment. And for me, there's a big difference there in what those are. So you've got an investment has the possibility of having a loss, right? With savings, we don't have that possibility. That's a totally different asset, and life insurance fits into that savings category. And a good friend of mine brought up this idea when we were talking about principles and things that we use, and it was this idea of certainty was one that we had, but he brought in the idea of uncertainty. And we have uncertain assets that we like to have, right? We have maybe market assets. Maybe we have real estate. Maybe we have all these other things that on paper they look great, but we know they have the ability to go negative, right? When we've had a major correction, whether it was in the real estate market, whether it was in the stock market, did everybody get hammered, have a big loss when those happened? No. Who didn't have it? The people that were in a position of cash, right? That they had cash to see them through. Maybe it was to pay rent on those vacancies, right? They could still make their payment, so they didn't have to sell off the property. It was everybody who was so leveraged out because they didn't have any assets to support it. So if we start thinking of a big picture and an integrated strategy, how do certain assets help make other assets more certain? So the more certainty assets we have, the more uncertainty. And I like to kind of relate it sometimes to a roller coaster. For those that love roller coasters, I enjoy roller coasters, right? We like the thrill of maybe we're going to get thrown out. But what do? We put a seatbelt on. That's our certainty piece to keep that from happening. So we get the thrill of the upside, but we save ourselves from getting thrown out of the roller coaster with the seatbelt. And I think if we can understand that, now then we can make our other assets better if they're properly integrated and properly balanced. So if we've got a good floor of certainty assets, it helps us see through those down years in the other assets so that we're not forced into a sales position. And I'll tell you, people that were in position of cash actually made out like bandits during those time frames, right? They had a fire sale they were buying assets at, whether it was real estate, whether it was market assets, whatever else it was. And so, one of the things I like to look at is we have gray swan events and black swan events that happen. And most people have heard of black swan events, not so much the gray swan events. So I'll kind of define them a little bit. Black swan events are those things that happen, and they happen on a fairly regular basis, but it's something we have no idea that it's going to happen. And if we look back at 9/11, when that first tower was hit, everybody was like, oh no, must have been a problem with the plane. There must have been nobody in their mind immediately thought this is a terrorist attack. Like that couldn't happen in the U.S. That's a foreign idea, right? And it wasn't until the second tower was hit that everybody said, oh, now we know we know what this is about, right? And so those are black swan events that we don't have any idea what they're going to be, they're totally unknown, versus gray swan events. And gray swan events are, they might happen to you. They've got a statistical chance of happening, but they might not. And an idea of that might be like disability, or having a car wreck, or having a house fire. Those things have a statistical likelihood, but they might not happen to you, right? There's a percentage of possibility. And so on those gray swan events, we typically have insurance to cover against that, right? We buy homeowners insurance, we buy automobile insurance, we buy disability insurance. That secures us across those gray swan events so that we can spread the risk with other people. But then how do we handle the black swan events? Things that we have no idea that are going to happen. And what I have seen is in most of those events, cash would have been the solution for those black swan events. So we need to keep ourselves in a position of certainty, and certainty really, for the most part, means cash. But do we want that cash sitting at 0.5% at a bank somewhere? Not ideal, right? And so that's one of those ideas, understanding that in the integration. It's not life insurance or the market, life insurance or real estate. It's all those things combined and how they strategically help and feed off of each other, right? And so this would be the third of the question that you asked me, what I thought were most important, right? And I think this is a big one. Most financial advice is really geared around how much money we pile up. And if you think about it, it becomes all about net worth at some age where we're going to think about distribution, whether that's 70, whatever it is, right? And so everybody's talking about, oh, well, if you do this, you'll have X amount more in net worth. So from an individual standpoint, why are you saving money and not spending it all today? Is it so that you can have a ribbon that says, I end up with X amount of money? Or is it so you have money to live off of during the distribution phase, right? It's all for distribution and legacy, is it not?
Yep.
So then why are advisors not talking about that distribution / legacy phase? It's all about piling up money. But see, what if, let's say I end up with, in a particular strategy, I end up with $5 million, but it's because I have a $5 million house. Well, that's not very spendable. So net worth look good, but what does that mean for what we're actually using the dollars for? So if we're not looking at that distribution phase, we don't know if we're really optimized or not. And most advisors are all about the net worth piece, even though the whole point of it is for cash flow. And so I think that's a big push that needs to happen, is looking at not just the accumulation phase, but also that distribution phase, and what our decisions today, how they're going to impact that piece in the future. That's really the only reason we're saving the money, right?
Thank you for recounting those ideas. Is just very valuable, because this is for validation. This is what I go to your trainings multiple times a year, and this is why I coach with someone like Wade, because these ideas are now part of my entire narrative, and how I encounter either the first time I meet a client, or how I do continuing education, or how I speak to a group. And they're very simple and very intuitive. But if you don't have clarity in the simplicity of a conversation we have right now, and you go straight to tools or a process, it's going to get lost in the weeds. And if you zoom out, it's really helpful to think now, years later, man, the idea that this is not an investment, that it's a safety asset, that it has certain benefits and properties that allow us to have more certainty, including more certainty for the uncertain assets, that it has a great rate of return, that it acts as insurance and protection in the times where we cannot anticipate bad things. And more importantly, if it's a function of income now and in the future, this mindset informs, man, this is the practice I'm running. I am very valuable for anyone that encounters my practice and becomes part of my community. So really, really helpful.
And I would just add on to kind of what you're saying, that second point, Todd. It's not either one or the other, right? It's, what was it Robert Kiyosaki says, the real growth comes on the edge of the coin.
Okay.
But the point being, there's also an importance of the sequence. A lot of times we lose track of what has to come first. Do I take all my money and invest? And some people win with that. People look and think, oh, look at that guy. He got lucky, right? Did he have the right sequence? I think sequence has got its place, and you really should pay attention to it. Like your point, I never say investments are bad. We have a lot of clients that have real estate and love real estate, or they love the market, whatever it is. But if you don't have liquidity and you don't have cash flow when times are bad, it'll wipe out 10 years worth of growth and 10 years worth of assets when that black swan event happens.
Yeah, and I think the unfortunate thing is we always hear about the successes. We don't realize the massive number of unsuccesses because that floor wasn't set. It's the same thing that happens from the casinos. You hear about the person that, hit the $1 million slot, but you don't hear about the millions of people that got wiped out, right? That's no fun. And I think that's a big part of what happens in the financial industry. So people think they can jump for that. All the focus is about rate of return. And the reality is, if, we want rate of return and savings to go together, but is savings fun? Not so much, right? It means we're doing without. And so we have to find a way to get that part, because which one's more important? Well, if I save $10,000 a year for the next 30 years, I'm going to end up with $300,000, right?
Yep.
If I earn 100% rate of return and I have $0 in there, I'm still going to end up with zero at the end. So ultimately, the savings more important. At least we would end up with something, and rate of return needs to be part of it. I'm not saying discount having a great rate of return, but we need to have one that's sustainable. And I think we might get lucky and put everything on black, and that happens to be what rolls up. But that's a risky move versus having a good strategic plan that has some basis that makes it work even when the negatives happen on those riskier or uncertain assets, right?
Yeah.
That's a good point. Thank you for listening for part 2 of the conversation with Todd Langford. I hope you enjoyed that one. I know the last part of the conversation is going to be just as enjoyable. So look for part 3 of the conversation with Todd Langford. Grateful to have you tune in today. If you're ready to rethink your financial journey and take the next step, make sure to subscribe. Until next time, stay curious and stay in control.